lot of those things came into play in that situation. And I was able to see, even though as a forecaster you had to make much greater leaps from what you were actually seeing on the computer models to what actually would happen, because the modeling wasn't anywhere near what it was now. But I saw enough evidence of a massive situation with a classic bitter cold air mass across Canada and northern New England, and very, very vigorous disturbance at high levels of the atmosphere that was going to separate from the flow and become this monster. And when you know that's going to happen high above you as a meteorologist, you know you're going to get a response of the storm development down on the ground. But in that day, some of the more veteran forecasters were even farther removed, you might say, from computer modeling. So they may not have had the confidence that something would happen until it actually happened, whereas I already was ready to make the leap of faith. And this is natural. This is what goes on as things move along. Michael is going to, you know, because of his youth, it actually will help him in a lot of situations because he's fresh out of school and learned a lot of new methods, and that's what happens. Another terrific meteorologist around the area, there are many, Matt Noyes on New England Cable News, who also was an intern of mine. That's not why he's a terrific meteorologist. He would have been independent of that, as Michael would be. But he's a terrific meteorologist, and he knows a lot of late ways to look at things and things like that. So it's an ongoing field, and that's one of the nice things. If you're in it for a long period of time, you keep learning. It never stops. And even with all your experience, it's going to help you in some situations, but you're still never going to get everything right. So there's always room to learn. But that's kind of the story of that storm, and I do get some credit in some circles of being the only one that forecasted. It's a little bit of an exaggeration. I might have done better than some others. But Bob Copeland, who was a longtime meteorologist at the station I'm at now, WCDB, he was kind of onto it. He did a good job with it. Some others did as well. But it was quite a situation to see in my first winter forecasting in Boston, no question about it. So it's an epic storm, and it's a benchmark, and it's really that storm that causes the grocery shelves to get cleaned out a lot of times, because nobody did that in that particular storm, and people still went to work like it was not a normal day. But then then you had so many stranded vehicles, and you had tractor trailers jackknifed on Route 128, backed everything up, snow piled up. Next thing you know, you got 3,000 vehicles, and that took a long time to clear up. So it was quite an epic storm in many ways. And in terms of snow, this is a taste, this storm, of what that was like. But that was worse, and certainly the coastal situation was way worse.
I was wondering, what was forecasting like before the age of computer modeling?
Well, I should throw that to my, no, I'm just kidding. Well, basically, it's like when I grew up as a kid and realized my interest in weather, I thought that, wow, I can actually forecast better than the meteorologists in the National Weather Service. And how could that possibly be? But the thing is, when you have a keen interest in something, you are so tuned in, you are so observant. You're like a sponge that keeps learning and absorbing because you're just so focused on it. And so I would go by, the sky, and when I saw the high, thin cirrus clouds, which are the ones up around 25,000 feet, and sometimes those are the first clouds that start to dim the sun, maybe 12 to 24 hours ahead of the storm. And then the clouds lower and thicken. And you start to learn these things, the wind direction and what the wind direction usually means and things like that. And of course, I too, believe it or not, when I was a kid, there actually was television. So I would watch also. And in New York, there was somebody who was doing weather. His name was Tex Antoine. He was a very, very talented weather presenter. He was very artistic, which I am not. I can barely do a stick figure. And he was tremendous. So he could really draw on the maps, and he was a great communicator. And one time I was watching him, and it was in the winter, and I knew there was a possible storm, and he doesn't have any of the modern things we have now. But he's working on this little cardboard with a magic marker on an easel, and he puts an H over Canada. And he draws it, and he looks at the camera, and he goes, cold high to the north. Then he draws an L in the Gulf of Mexico, and he goes, a warm storm to the south. And then he goes, That's it. He had me. I knew what that meant. That meant we were going to get it. And sure enough, we did get a storm, and I always remembered that. And this is amazing, the things that you can remember, because for me, it's so many years ago. I remember walking home from school the day before Thanksgiving one year. I think I was in middle school at the time. And the sky was like a leaden gray overcast, but it wasn't snowing or anything, but it sure looked like it felt like it. And I come home and I watch the weather that evening, and he starts off, as he did every evening, with like an expression. And he said, "I'll have to admit, the feel of snow was in the air. But you'll have to admit, snow for Thanksgiving is kind of rare." And I went, wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's creative. He totally was locked in, without realizing it, to what I was thinking and experiencing. And that's pretty amazing that somebody can actually do that. So, you know, I think that was the person, you might say, that kind of, you know, helped inspire me a little bit more. But it also made me realize that there's so many different talents that can be brought into the fold, and it isn't just one particular style that can work. I think a lot of different styles can work as long as the style is true to who the person is. As long as somebody isn't trying to be somebody he or she is not really meant to be. And then it can work. So anybody that's really excited about what they do, I think that comes across. And I think that's helpful, and I think people like that, and people are drawn to that. So that's why people like us are so fortunate, and maybe some of you will wind up there, whether it's this field or another field. But I think it's great when you do something professionally that you really truly enjoy, because you spend a lot of your life, you know, working, and it really makes a big difference in that part of your life, and even in other parts of your life, if you really enjoy it. So I hope that eventually happens for all of you.
And also, how do you strike a balance between what your experience is telling you and what, say, what the model's going to be telling you? You guys can both chime in on this.
Yeah, I'll go first, then I'll let Michael go. That's a great question, because there are times when, you know, the models have gotten so much better that you're a little more cautious now to, you know, kind of wander too far off from what they were saying, whereas years ago, you would kind of have to do that. And so sometimes, you know, well, you know, this model's been pretty good, so I'll stick a little closer to the model, and then maybe it doesn't work out so well, and I'm going, you know, when I was a kid, I would have done better, because I wouldn't have had the model, I would just use my common sense. So sometimes you're trying to balance, you know, all the great physics and math that are in those models, and it is great, with your own common sense. But that's why sometimes, even today, these days you can actually do this, and I did this winter, and I'm sure others did too, actually showing sometimes ahead of a storm what a computer model is predicting in terms of snowfall. But then I will always follow it up with what I'm thinking, and hopefully why. You know, I think it's a little bit overdone, or it tends to overdo the situation. You know, or maybe it's just so early on, it's a good number of days ahead, and I'm just giving an idea of what one of the models are saying. But as we get closer to it, of course, we call that value adding. So even though you have so much help now, technically, you as an experienced forecaster, as a meteorologist, using your experience, your knowledge, your intelligence, how intensely you're following the system, you can always add on to what the model is literally saying, and that should never really be forgotten. So it's kind of like a human-machine mix, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I know Harvey and I have discussed at length. Computer models tend to come out every 6 hours or so, and each of those solutions every 6 hours can be wildly different in some cases. So a lot of times, I think we'll say the trend is our friend. So you know, you're not focusing on necessarily the specific details of every given model run, but you're looking at the overall trend that you're seeing with those things put together. And I think that really helps a lot, not necessarily getting wrapped up in the finer points until you really have the confidence that you're locking in on a solution. You know, not only that, but going back and reanalyzing what happens after a storm is very important as well. So you can see, okay, what did this model say? What actually happened? And is this a bias that this particular model has every single time? For example, is the American computer model constantly warmer than it is? And is it giving us too much or too little snow? And if we understand that after a storm, we can apply that knowledge going forward. So I think those are two important points that I certainly try to employ, and Harvey has sort of passed along to me as well.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that Michael's bringing up. And that, again, comes to the passion and interest. Because let's say a certain forecast doesn't work out too well, okay? Well, one particular meteorologist might say, you win some and you lose some. That's life, okay? Then there are people like Michael, and hopefully myself, and Tyler as well, and you're going to go, that really bothers me. And I want to see what went wrong, so at least the next time something similar happens, I'm going to catch it. And that could be the difference as time goes on, why track record means something with meteorologists.